So I'm here with Michelle Ferreri for the second time. She is currently the MP in Canadian Parliament for Peterborough-Kawartha, and she is also the Shadow Minister of Tourism, and she's part of the Canadian Conservative Party. And yeah, how are you doing, Michelle?
I'm doing really well. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Before we begin, I should like to address the Trent sweater. If you're watching on video, then you'll see that she's wearing the Trent sweater, which is the same one that yeah, it's the same one that I had when I was in Trent for my first year. So I'd like to hear you talk about your experience at Trent when you were a student there, and you recently revisited the school. So how's that?
It's great. Yeah, thanks. So I went to Trent. I actually have an interesting, I guess maybe it's not interesting to some people, but an interesting kind of story of my Trent University education. And yesterday I had a chance to kind of go back and my real passion obviously is mental health. That's why I went into politics and in particular youth mental health. And so working with Trent University to try to create a summit around mental health. And so my story is I went right after high school, and my mom worked at Trent University, and so she was really well versed in sort of the stressors of being a university student. She was really empathetic and compassionate to sort of university life, and what a challenging time it is for university students. So in my second year, I was a little bit lost, like I think a lot of university students are, not really sure what you're taking or where you want to go or why you're doing it. And you're trying to balance the load of work and assignments, and it's frustrating when you're not really sure why you're doing it, you know. And so I really wanted to take a break. And so I went to my parents. I was really nervous to tell them I really wanted to pull out of university and take some time to work and figure myself out. And they were amazing. And I say it's one of the greatest gifts my parents gave me. They were really understanding and supportive of that decision. And that was really what I needed, I think, in that time of my life. I needed support, and they gave it to me. So I went and I worked full time, and I worked out in the real world, and realized, it was good, but I didn't see a lot of room for growth, and still didn't really know what I wanted to do. I'm a really curious person. I love a lot of different things, which is, a really good fit for a member of parliament, actually. But so I went back to college. I went to Loyalist College and got my biotechnician diploma.
Mhm.
And then after that, I went back and finished my degree at Trent University. So I did it kind of in a, ping pong or pinball sort of way, I guess I would say it. So I went back and finished my degree, and it was great. And so that was really good. But while I was at Trent, I also took part in the SARP project. So that is this. Do you know what that is,
No, I don't.
Sean?
Please tell me.
Yeah, so it's the Student Archaeological Research Project. So I got to go
Oh,
to
wow.
Belize
Oh, wow.
and work on a Mayan archaeological dig, and it was fantastic. It was very formative. But yesterday, when I went back to do the tour of the campus and to check in with, things have really changed. Like I think I graduated in 2002. I have to double check that because everybody goes, "What year did you graduate?" And I'm like, I don't remember because I went back, but I'll double check them. I'm pretty sure it was 2002.
Mhm.
And and things have changed so much there. It's so beautiful and the student services, but I was really interested in how their mental health programs are there with the counselors and COVID. And for a lot of people, they know that, university is an extremely formative part of your life, especially if you've been in a family where maybe you didn't have a lot of autonomy, or maybe you had sort of helicopter parents, or maybe you just didn't know really who you were. And so it's a very identity forming period of life, which can be extremely stressful,
Yeah.
very important, but very stressful. So we talked a lot about what the resources are that they have there, in terms of counselors, and mental health supports, and seeking help. Um, Seeking self-help has really increased even from my time. Like I'm 42, I'll be 43 in May. And so I think there's been a significant change in your demographic and even my kids' demographic, like my youngest is 12, of sort of saying, yeah, they're more in tune with their emotions. There's not as much stigma attached to seeking help or wanting to talk about your mental health. And so I think they've come a long way. We've got a long way to go still. My interest in particular is in those first 15 years of life, because that's usually when the trauma happens that you're trying to undo. Not everybody who has mental illness had trauma, but it is a very common undercurrent. And so if we can sort of look into those first 15 years of life from a policy and federal policy level, what can we be doing to support sort of mental health standards across the country? That's where my passion really lies. So we're hoping to do something in Trent University during my time here in Parliament around a summit, mental health summit.
Awesome. Yeah. Yeah. So the last time we talked to each other, I believe it was March of last year. And I was still working my way towards the degree, which I eventually had in September.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. So when we last conversed in this medium, you were running for to be an MP. Well, ever since then, you obviously have won the election. I believe you won it in September, so around the same time that I got my degree, defeating the incumbent Mariam Monsef of the Liberals. I believe it's been 6 or 7 months since you've been an MP, since you've won the election. So my question is, what's the best and worst part of the job?
What should we start with? Let's start with the worst and then we'll go to the best, because it's always good to end on a high note. I think the most challenging part is you want to help everyone. I think a lot of people go into this role. It's a public service role, and you want to help everyone, and you have to acknowledge that you can't. And I think that's a really tough balance. You also have to keep your family life intact, and the volume of this job, the volume of emails, the volume of calls, the volume of people you're trying to help is very significant and overwhelming. And so I think that can be it's a very big responsibility. And so I think I always say often the greatest challenge is often the greatest strength, right? This responsibility is incredibly important, and that's great, but it's also incredibly challenging. And so how do you help everyone? Well, you can't, and you're definitely never going to make everyone happy.
Oh, yeah.
So that's another big acceptance that you have to do, right? No matter what you do, somebody somewhere is going to be upset with that decision and not feel that it caters to them. And so you have to be really grounded in who you are and your values. You have to listen, but you still have to make really tough decisions. And it's a lot like parenting. Actually, I've always said it's very parallel to parenting, because you have to be tough and fair, but compassionate and empathetic all at the same time. And you have to be a good listener as well. And so I think that's really the hardest part, is just feeling like sometimes you're not getting as much done as you want. It's sometimes very slow. Everything's very slow. It's like very similar to building a house. Like you could be the contractor, say the plumbing contractor, but you can only do your job when everyone else is on time doing their job. Mm-hmm. Right. And the government is very similar to that. So if I want to help somebody with immigration, I'm reliant on Service Canada, or I'm reliant on the minister to make sure that everything is rolling. So you sometimes feel very restricted in what you can do, but you can't lose sort of hope and focus, and you got to keep going. Sometimes even when it feels like you're not making a lot of progress, you still are, right? It's like climbing the mountain one step at a time. Mm-hmm. The best part about it is, I look here right now as I look at my desk with all the things to do, and I have a very long list of local businesses that are going to get a call from me today
Mhm.
about money that they've been awarded for Canada Summer Jobs. So things like that, when you can actually help people. There's a gentleman down in the office behind me right now, and he's in here, and the staff is helping him navigate his passport application. So when you can have like these kind of tangible um, results of helping people, that's very rewarding. Or when people don't feel like they've ever been listened to, and you're able to listen to them, or maybe stand up in the House of Commons and advocate on their behalf. I mean, we have a very controversial but important thing happening in Canada around federal vaccine mandates.
Yeah.
A lot of people, obviously under Shadow Minister of Tourism, this is a big part of my file, but I get hundreds, thousands of messages from people who haven't been vaccinated for a huge variety of reasons. And their stories are compelling, and they're sad, and they haven't seen their family. They haven't held their grandchild. They've been isolated. So when you can stand up and advocate for people like that, or the independent travel advisors who've never been included in any kind of funding relief, that's very rewarding to be able to advocate on behalf of somebody who doesn't feel like they have a voice. So that's a very rewarding part as well.
Awesome. Yeah. I think so. Before we get to the next topic, which I don't think I can get a conservative Canadian MP on this show without some Trudeau bashing. So let's get to that. But before we get to that, good juicy part, I would like to tell you about a friend that I have in Peterborough. He's a great fan of yours. He voted for you in 2021. He may have done some campaigning for you. I know that he bought one of the lawn signs.
Awesome.
So he listened to my first conversation with you, and I'm gonna send him this one. I believe the last time that he voted for Trudeau the first time, and he became rather disillusioned by Justin. I believe he has a long record of voting Liberal. And one of the things that he find disturbing about Trudeau, besides from the blackface stuff, is that he seems more sanctimonious than his actual character is. Granted, he's a charming man, but the more I observe of him, even as a non-Canadian, I find that he lacks a lot of substance and a lot of good substance, and that actually shows, if no one has noticed before, when in his response to the truckers' freedom convoy. I believe this event is, far enough in the rearview mirror for us to, reflect on it. But so do you remember where you were when that happened, and what were your responses to the truckers' protests in Ottawa? I mean, you mentioned the vaccine mandates, and obviously that was one of the causes.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it was this parliament in general, Chong, has been probably one of the most historic. And everybody has sort of said that to me. They said, this is just unprecedented what you've dealt with in your first 7 months as an MP. So there's been a lot thrown at me in terms of history making. The trucking convoy is a very interesting thing that we could probably spend hours dissecting, and probably will for the remaining part of history. It will be in history books of breaking it down and analyzing what it was and how it was handled and the impact it had. I think what I saw from the trucking convoy was, I think Canadians for the most part are really we're pretty centrist type of people. We're pretty forgiving. We're pretty easygoing people, really, for the most part. And so when COVID hit, I think we did, the majority of us did everything that was asked of us, right? Okay, yeah, we care about the other person and we do these things. But somewhere along the line, it's a very interesting deep dive of human psychology, because we often will do what we think we're supposed to do We don't really want to say how we really feel because we don't want to ruffle feathers. We're pretty polite, and we think one thing and we're kind of like, well, that's not, I don't really want to do that, but I'm doing it to help my neighbor kind of thing. And I think what started to happen was, we'd never had anything like this before.
Mhm.
And so people were forgiving, but the goalposts kept moving.
Mhm.
And that is a classic indication of gaslighting. And so, and when we say gaslighting, it's, we tell you one thing and we do another. And then after we do it, we're sorry. And, we try to tell you what you want to hear. And so we saw this from the Trudeau government over and over. And so you have this group of people, the truckers, all of a sudden say, wait, like, we're done. And they started this movement. And it wasn't just people who were, lumped into the conspiracy theorist group. And it wasn't just this group of people who were unvaccinated. It was a huge group of Canadians who felt powerless and voiceless and felt isolated and alone. And so when you went and you saw these overpasses, when the truckers started to mobilize, and the story I shared in my speech from the House of Commons was a 19-year-old girl who went, and full of shame for feeling how she felt, and thought she was the only one who thought, I just want to go live my life. I care about Canadians. I'm considerate of people's health. I'm not a bad person, but I want to move on with my life. And why have we missed the balance of risk versus reward, of mental health and physical health, and being inclusive and not shaming one group over another?
Mhm.
Um, and so she went to the overpass, and there was hundreds of people at this overpass with flags and food and drinks, and the truckers went by and they beeped their horn, and she just became so emotional, and she broke down because she didn't realize how many people felt the way she felt.
Mhm.
And I think that was the power of the trucking convoy. And I think it was, we just want to live our life. We don't want to be told we're bad people. We don't want to be told we're racist or misogynistic or we don't care, because we do care. I do care about my grandma, but I can be mindful of my individual risk tolerance, care for others, and live.
Mhm.
And so you had this massive movement of people, and then you had the political side come on top to say, these truckers are racist and they're all of these things. And it was horribly portrayed in the media.
Mhm.
And as somebody who walked through it every single day from to Parliament Hill on my own as a woman, I never once felt unsafe. I never once felt that it was a danger. Everything has an expiration date, and absolutely they needed to move from Parliament Hill. Like, and we were very open to that. Like, you can't block this. You have to let people get back to their life. But at the same time, they mobilized a movement that created a discussion across this country and consequently the world, where people had to have honest conversations about how they felt and that they wanted to see things differently, and they wanted their government to listen to them. And so I think it was probably one of the most profound movements that we will see in history. And the one night I went out, and I was walking home, and it was so delicate because people were so polarized with what they were seeing on the news and how it was being portrayed. And that these truckers are horrible, vile people, but the experience on the ground was completely different. You had children, there was food. It was a place of hope. It was a place of hope for many people. And so one night when I was walking, I decided to do a live Facebook video to show people at home. And it was a risk to do it because you don't know what's going to happen when you do a live Facebook video. And so I walked back to my hotel room, and I recorded it. And I don't know if you had a chance to watch it. I think it has almost 600,000 views. But it's very interesting because these three gentlemen I run into on the street, and I end up interviewing them, and they're three men that met at the convoy from different provinces, different backgrounds, different vaccination status, different jobs,
Mhm.
and they were so in sync, and they built a bond of what they wanted. They just want to go back to living. They don't want to be told they're bad people. They don't judge somebody whether they were vaccinated or unvaccinated or wore a mask or didn't wear a mask. They could be mindful of people's individual risk tolerance. And it was a very powerful thing that, was very organic and unplanned. And I think it showcased the people that were there. And I think we got painted as supporting people who broke the law. And I think that's unfortunate because, like I said, absolutely, everything has an expiration date. You can't block this any further. But what they did and what happened across the country was they really changed the dialogue and forced a conversation that needed to be happen and held the government to account. And then, I mean, we could spend another hour talking about the Emergencies Act being invoked and how crazy that was because it just didn't make any sense. And I remember the day walking back to Parliament Hill, and the police had come and they'd removed everybody, and that was unfortunate that it had to get to that point. I don't think it ever needed to get to that point, to be honest with you. I think it was very poor leadership that you needed. I think it put the police in a terrible position. I think it was unfair to them because I don't even think it needed to be put to that point. But on my way walking back to Parliament, the streets were completely cleared. Wellington was completely cleared. The Emergencies Act was still invoked. And I said, okay, he'll remove it today because we had put forth a motion to remove it. And they said no. And that's politics because we're never going to agree with what you put forth. It has to be our idea. And so I thought, okay, well, the trucks are all gone. So without a doubt, he'll remove it today. And he was having a press conference at 11 o'clock that day. And I really genuinely believed he would remove it. And all my colleagues who've been doing this for much longer than I have said, no, he won't, Michelle. He won't do it. You are giving him too much credit. He's not who you think he is. He will not remove it. He will double down. And I said, no way. And sure enough, he came on the news conference, even though there was no blockade on the street, and said he was keeping the Emergencies Act invoked. And I think in that moment, I was really, it was a real awakening of who we have in our leadership role. And it was very disheartening for me, very deflating to me that politics was taking a front seat to the greater good. And then the non-confidence vote of what he did that day to push, it was very disheartening. And I think people really started to see, much like your friend, and I know I'm going on and on here, Chong, so I feel bad, but to your friend who had hopes of the 2015, Justin Trudeau versus the 2022, they are not the same person.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that is where a lot of liberals now sit, and they're sad and frustrated. And so I think, hopefully we can gain that trust and invite them over and say, you know what, you don't have to define yourself by a label of a party you vote for. I think you have to choose what values you want instilled in your country.
Awesome. Yeah. So I know that other podcasts, they clip certain like excerpts of their shows, and I haven't had the habit of doing so, but I think I would, because that answer you just gave, like, it was amazing. And
oh, thanks.
And it's just very powerful, very reasonable, and very balanced, of course. So when the truckers happened, I was already back in Hanoi, and I watched the news closely. You can disagree with the cause of these truckers. You can argue about the legitimacy of these mandates. I've heard that they protested the law that requires vaccine passports upon re-entering the borders of Canada from the US or such. It's perfectly reasonable to say that we disagree with your cause. But what I saw from Trudeau, from what I've read in the news, is it's just an example of increasingly appalling leadership. I know that the first few days I saw that his reaction ranges from hiding in his basement or bunker to, calling these people racist and sexist and all that. I thought, well, it's pretty bad, but it's just typical Justin Trudeau. But the moment he, the moment he, you know, dropped the hammer and brought in the Emergencies Act, I thought, well, that's very, very worrying. That's not what you do in a functioning liberal democracy. And ironically enough, it is a repeat of what his dad did during the 70s. And yeah, well, of course, we can spend the entirety of this podcast talking about how bad Trudeau is and how he, should leave. But of course, another crisis happened, and that is in Eastern Europe. And I've heard someone, I think it was Douglas Murray in Britain, he said that the Ukraine crisis actually helped a lot of Western politicians, because now they can take a back, their domestic problems can take a back seat to, what's going on in Eastern Europe, which I think is, well, we can all agree is a lot more serious. So what has the government been doing to to remedy the Russia-Ukraine situation? Are they taking in refugees?
So, I think you hit a nail on the head there too, Chong, where it was, the day we woke up and Putin had invaded Ukraine. We said, and not to make light of it, but it's like, now you know what a real emergency is, right? That is an emergency. And so I think it was interesting how quickly that all happened within the frame of a few days, right? Having an Emergencies Act invoked for some truckers parked on a street versus, a military invading a country and bombing it. And so I think, that was a really a good indicator of a real emergency. Yeah, so we put forth a motion to speed up visa-free travel. It's interesting, and I'm not the best versed in this to talk about immigration. Our shadow minister, Jaz Singh Halan, would be better versed than this. But there is a downfall to making refugee status versus immigrant status. They lose a lot of access to resources as a refugee. So that's why we put forth the visa-free travel to get them here faster and to help them. We already have a significant backlog in immigration, as you know, with Afghanistan. The government never fulfilled its commitment to help them. And so we left a lot of Afghan interpreters and those who helped us during the Afghan war stranded. And I mean, a lot of people saw that footage of them taking off on the tarmac in Kabul and dying. It's terrible, terrible things. And, we made a promise to those Afghans that we would help them because they helped us when we were on the ground, and we still haven't fulfilled our commitment to that. So we have an immigration problem. And the other issue is we have for the tourism sector in particular, a lot of the tourism businesses that I talk to and work across the country with, they are completely dependent on temporary foreign workers, and getting them here the backlog has gotten longer and harder, and the paperwork and all of the delays and the bureaucracy has gotten worse. Then we have a housing problem. So people who live here can't get a house, and yet we want to bring over immigrants to help with our labor shortage. Well, there's no houses for the people who live here. How are we going to have housing for the people we're bringing in? So housing is kind of the bottom foundation. If we need housing first for everything else to be built up. And so we've got to get our housing market under control. I think we're doing what we can in Ukraine. Always there's more that we can do. I think it's really highlighted our missteps in not investing in our military. If there was an attack on us tomorrow, could we protect ourselves? I don't think we can. Our military is lacking. It has been for a long time. We called for the F-35 fighter jets, and that was a no-go. But now Trudeau is saying yes, he'll consider it. I mean, our Arctic sovereignty is a major issue as well. And where do we stand? where are we sitting and as a Canadian military if we were to be invaded tomorrow? Or, so I think you always have to be prepared to best stand up against dictators or to just protect yourself. We made a commitment to NATO for our 2% GDP. We put forth that motion in the House as well, and it was passed. So I think that's great as well. So, I think we're doing what we can. I do think often in these instances, I like to say the partisanship is parked a little bit more than regular things. And we kind of say, okay, across party lines, this is a threat to our, international democracy. So we have to band together and do what we can. We're always going to be, the opposition and say we can do this differently or do it better and try to hold them to account. But I think it's for the most part, helping Ukrainians as best we can is important. We have a very strong Ukrainian community in Canada.
Yeah, I see. And I know that there are several people who are Ukrainians who are listening to my show from, I guess, the demographics, statistics in my podcast. But let's talk about the two main characters in this theater of warfare. One of them, of course, is Vladimir Zelensky, who has become a hero in the West for good reason. He started out as a comedian who stars in a show where a comedian becomes the president, and now he becomes the president. And from what the more I see of him, the more I respect and admire this man. He is standing up for the sovereignty of his country, and he is very pro-West, pro-democracy.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the second guy, we've all known his name for a while. Vladimir Putin is an example of an autocrat and an authoritarian, and some would say a mob boss. Now, what's very interesting about Putin is I know that in Vietnam, I think people are starting to wake up about like the extent of his tyranny, but we have had like multiple wake up calls, like when Russia invaded Chechnya or Georgia or Crimea, and people, a lot of people, especially the news in Vietnam, they actually saw him as kind of like a great leader, like a great paramount leader who gets things done. And I listened to our conversation from a year ago, again, to prepare for this one. And in it, we talk a lot about like how certain personalities, well, I don't think neither one of us are, that prefer to be governed by an authoritarian, a dictatorship, as long as they do not get to you. But it's quite alarming that that is the case. And yeah, so how would you assess that? What makes authoritarianism so attractive to that segment of the population?
You certainly ask deep questions, Sean, and I love that about you. My head is turning because I have my TV on in my office right now, and it's Minister of National Defense Anita Anand making an announcement right now about Russia's war on Ukraine. So I was trying to see what she was saying, but I think that's a really interesting question, and I think that's actually what sparks the critical thinking when you want to have a discussion about Putin, or you want to have a discussion about, historical people who have mobilized thousands of people to do what many would consider unthinkable things. And it's a very interesting discussion. And I think, from the time we're born in Western, I can only speak to Western culture because that's my experience. But in Western culture, from the time we are born, we are sort of taught to obey. Right? We are indoctrinated basically to trust and follow the advice and to listen to people in positions of authority.
Yeah.
And so what happens when somebody in a position of authority is corrupt? What happens when somebody in a position of authority has a self-serving agenda or a hurtful agenda. But the people who are programmed to follow still follow, because that's what you do and that's how you operate. I think it's a really interesting intersection of politics and where you sit of your values. And as a conservative, I consider myself very much an autonomous free thinker, right? And so I don't like a lot of government overreach. I don't really like to be told what to do and how to do. I want to be trusted that I can make the best decisions that serve my family and myself and my community while being mindful and compassionate to those around me. And so that's how I am as a person. But you're, the person beside me, and you and I just happen to maybe share the same sense of those values. But there's plenty of people, as you know, when we go to the ballots, who don't think like that. And so, following somebody in charge, regardless of what their beliefs are, that there's a loyalty there, and that goes to a lot of aspects. That goes across. I've seen it in politics as well. It wouldn't matter. There's a running joke. It wouldn't matter if you ran a purple monkey, as long as you were a liberal or an NDP or a conservative, you're getting voted, because that my loyalty is to the party, not to who you are or what you believe. And so I think there's a lot of indoctrination in Western culture that, we have to follow the leader. And that's a pretty tough programming to undo.
Yeah, I think the best answer I can figure out is that, well, it's not that people like to be told what to do. I don't think so. I mean, I've seen a lot of children and teenagers to know that authoritarian non-democracies and democracies alike, children and teenagers do not like to be told what to do. But I think the difference between people who are inculcated with a mindset of liberty and those who are not is that, well, when you have freedom, then you also have responsibility. And it means that you have to own what you did. You can take credit for the good stuff that you did, and you also have to take blame for the bad things that you did, or even what you've contributed to. That there's that phrase, right? The buck stops here. So even when you're not directly involved in something that end up terribly, well, you have to take responsibility for that, and hold yourself accountable. And I believe that people who are more gravitated towards authoritarianism, they are not that willing to take that responsibility, and so they see themselves as.
I agree.
Yeah, they see themselves.
I agree, and I think a lot of it comes from fear as well, and so your lived experience and what you grew up with as parents, those are really big factors in that discussion too, Chong. Because I remember this one person saying to me, "Paychecks come from the mail," and I was like, "Whoa." Wow, it's kind of like the person who lives in an urban center, disconnected from farming or lived experience in farming, and thinks that, meat comes from the grocery store, chicken comes from the grocery store. And so you don't know what you don't know, right? And so if there's an element of fear as well, I think those people who don't have lived experience to have to work for that paycheck, right? You still work, but it's there regardless. And I think that's what divided us with COVID too, because you see a lot of people who were very pro lockdown who didn't lose a paycheck. So it didn't impact them the same way. So they were able to feel like, no, lockdowns are the best way to go. And that's the way it should be, because their lived experience comes into that factor of it's not going to impact them. And many times it's the medical officers of health who were given the control to make these decisions because it was a health decision, but medical officers of health never lost a paycheck, right? Yeah. So, and I always say everything has to fall into a balance. Everything has to have a balance somewhere. And I think the balance went out the window somewhere along the line of making a decision that took into account everyone, and it was unfortunate, and it pitted people against each other, and it was I don't know if you'll ever make those bonds up again. Like, I think you've lost friendships, family members. A lot of things have happened to Canadians and around the world because of that.
Mhm. So I'd like to talk about a bill that's being presented in the National Assembly, Canadian, of course, Bill
Mhm.
67, and it
Mm.
concerns the addition of anti-racism teachings in educational facilities, like
Mhm.
schools and universities alike.
Mhm.
Um, I've not read the entire bill in full, but I've heard the discussion with Jordan Peterson and Rex Murphy.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
from
Mhm.
what I've heard, both of them are incredibly concerned about the implications
Mhm.
of this bill.
Mhm.
And I have my concerns too, because I saw that they did introduce an anti-racism department at
Mhm.
Trent, when in my final year of school. And I know that that friend of mine I just told you about, he is currently entering his master's programs, and I think they have mandatory sessions to you know facilitated by these departments.
Mhm.
Now, my question to you is, and I hope this is up to par. Um, Canada, unlike Vietnam, is a multi-ethnic society, multicultural society, and um, well, as such, we have to have a climate where, well, racial grievances is obsolete and antiquated and, well, marginalized. If well, we cannot legislate away racism, um, unless we are very much authoritarian. So, but what these anti-racism training, at least from what I've read, to me does, is that they seek to do that. They seek to legislate behavior, they and language, what is considered racist and what isn't. And for the
Mhm.
most part, the complaints are highly subjective. So I am so here's my question. Um, so okay, I have to think about it for a bit. Well, why is it that this fervor around anti-racism appears when Canada and most of the West is the least racist they have ever been? And how can fair and frank and reasonable discussions about Canada's rather ugly history around race be facilitated without introducing this rather pernicious racial grievance?
Hmm. Again, with the very simple, light questions, Sean. So Bill 67 is actually Ontario bill. So it's not a federal bill. So it is
I
provincial.
see.
So it's not my jurisdiction. But I actually have, obviously had a lot of parents write to me about this. And it's funny because when I went to, Trent University yesterday, I had this conversation, and it was off the record a little bit with a few people who work at Trent, and it's tough because you have this sort of indoctrination that's happening of belief systems that get passed on by people in positions of authority.
Mhm.
And there's a brilliant book that I listen to. I do Audible now because I don't have time to sit down and read books, but it's called The Coddling of the American Mind.
Yes, I've heard of it.
And it's a great book that really dives into how did we get to a place of or. So this is my belief. This is how I interpreted it, I guess. We have replaced the word and with or.
Yeah.
You're either with me
Or
or
again.
you're against me. You either like, you're either doing all these things or you're a racist.
Mhm.
Or and so it's become this very black and white conversation in an extremely nuanced world. And we've lost the ability to have healthy debate because we have extremely sensitive people And we have extremely sensitive people that for some reason feel it is their duty to go out and advocate on behalf of a group that doesn't even represent them. And I think that's one of the most patronizing things you can do.
Mhm.
And the only example I can give, and you can maybe touch on this too from your ethnic background, but as a woman, if
Mhm.
a man comes out and says, I'm here to advocate on behalf of women's rights, you don't get to advocate for what I want, right? And it's in a way, it's sort of saying I'm not capable. It's
Mhm.
kind of patronizing that you don't think I'm capable to do that. So I think we need to stop with that. I think we need to stop having these sort of heroes who think they're doing all this great work on behalf of another group when
Mhm.
the group hasn't even said, I didn't ask you to do that. And I think it's similar to when we look at those living with disabilities. And I had a great conversation with a woman one time, and she was in a wheelchair. She had cerebral palsy, and she was getting into my car, and I said, do you want me to help you? And she said, asking me if I need help is as far as it goes, but to assume I need help
Mhm.
is not. It's not fair, and it doesn't help anybody. And I thought that is a really great sort of way to synopsis it. But in terms of the university level, we really need to do some deep diving, and then we need to do it back down to the secondary and elementary level too. But in universities, um, they are not mandated what the curriculum is, right? The professor gets to do whatever they want to do, and so there's actually a couple instances um, at a university in Ontario, and somebody came to me who's in the class. It was a political science class, and they used me
Mm.
as an example of a terrible politician,
Uh-huh.
and they're very left leaning, and so you can imagine the influence that has on students who are forming their identity, forming their ideas. It is, I always say how I got to choose my political allegiance or involvement is because I had a OAC at the time, which you wouldn't remember. It was grade 13. They removed it, and it was a grade 13 OAC politics class. And we had a politics teacher who was very determined to teach us nonpartisan. He said, it is up to you to decide which values. I will tell you what each party stands for. And you know what? In a perfect world, not one party is going to be everything you want it to be, but you find one that aligns the most with your beliefs. But it is your job to do what you want to do. I've heard, incidences of teachers saying things like the conservatives are terrible.
Mhm.
And I mean, this is against what you're supposed to be doing. And so this all kind of ties back into to racism in a way that we're not able to have healthy discussions. And when you kind of muzzle somebody or you want to remove history, like taking down statues, or you want to pretend something didn't happen,
Mhm.
how are we ever supposed to learn and move forward? If we don't have these healthy discussions and these critical thinking discussions, Strong, we don't move forward. And I know Jordan Peterson, I think he was actually coming to Trent University, and the students said he's not allowed to come here.
Oh.
He can't come.
Mhm.
We don't want him here. Well, that's not democracy. Like,
No.
just because you don't agree with somebody,
Mhm.
right, doesn't mean you don't engage with them. But there is a line. So it all comes back to free speech in a short answer, I think, is free speech. But always a line of hate, right? Like, you can't have hate. And so it gets blurry for some people because they want to interpret something as hateful.
Mhm.
And that's not always true, right? So it's a very complicated issue. But I think I mean, you've summarized it really, really well. And I think, for example, you can say things that I can't say, right?
Right.
Because you're Vietnamese and I'm white, right? So I can't say some things, or I'm a woman, so I can say things that you can't say about, right? So I think we've gotten very, very delicate for some reason as a society, and we are not able to have those hard, curious conversations that we used to have.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, I mean, as well, I have a lot of problems with the anti-racism doctrine that's being, proliferated. But I think among them, obviously, as an individual, I find that it is in itself very anti-individual because
Mhm.
it sees
It's
people,
paradoxical, right? It's
it
actually,
sees yeah, it sees
I
people
know,
as fundamentally skin deep. You
I
are
know.
defined by the color of your skin, and so let's just go with that. I'm not an individual. I'm just a member of this racial group, and of course, it leads to a person who is of that racial group who espouses opinions that are not of that racial group being marginalized. Certain
Agreed.
minority
Agreed.
for themselves.
It's
And
like when Trudeau picked his cabinet,
Mhm.
when he was elected and he said, I have to have 50% women.
Oh yeah.
I was like, pardon? You need qualified people.
Yeah.
What does it matter if what color your skin is or what your sex is? You
Mhm.
need qualified people. So, that's just pandering, in my opinion.
Yeah, of course. And I think that's what that kind of philosophy needs to, be etched in stone in a functioning multi-ethnic democracy. In that, we're proud of having multiple peoples of multiple ethnicities
Sorry,
living.
my dog just came into my office, John.
Yeah, but
Dolly, you can close the door.
oh, he's a cute one.
Yeah, she's a little golden retriever.
Oh, she is it she?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah. I don't know
my.
if you can see her. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
I've just been caught misgendering, so the gender police are going to get me anytime soon. But what I was trying to say is that to have a functioning multi-ethnic democracy, you need to, I think the philosophy of not treating an individual's ethnicity or gender as a cornerstone characteristic of their individuality, it should be a first priority. You know, one can be proud of
Agreed.
having a multi-ethnic society without mentioning the ethnicity of everyone all the time. So
I think it was, and I'm mindful of our time. I see we only have 4 minutes left, but I think it was Samuel L. Jackson who said the best way to stop racism is to stop talking about it. And I always thought that was an interesting phrase. I don't know if it's, the exact right approach, but I see what he's saying about it, right? I think the more oxygen you give something, the bigger it becomes instead of just, I don't need to walk into a room and be a woman in politics, right? It's like let's just talk about the qualifications and what we bring to the table. So,
of course. So yeah, so I'd like to end this by asking you about the conservative leadership race. I understand that
oh yes.
Aaron O'Toole is stepping down. I'd like to hear some of your thoughts about him, and of course some of your comments about the candidates. I think we've narrowed it down to three now. So
Mhm.
who are they, and what can you say about Aaron O'Toole?
I love Aaron O'Toole. I ran because of Aaron O'Toole.
Hmm.
He's connected to my community. I thought he was, a great leader. As a rookie MP, I was very disheartened to see him removed from caucus. I'm a big believer in investing in people, not exchanging people. But here we are. So here we are. So moving forward, now we actually have 11 candidates in the leadership race. But there's really only, I think, what you're referring to is there's about 3 or 4 frontliners. And so that would be Pierre Poilievre, Jean Charest, Patrick Brown, and Leslyn Lewis are sort of the real front runners of that. I have endorsed Pierre Poilievre.
Mhm.
I think Pierre is the person we need to win the country. And I think, Pierre has spent his career studying and, advocating for finances and the economy. And right now, that is the number one issue in this country. And when you hear me talk about mental health, that is exactly directly correlated to the economy. When we look at having a house, that's the economy. If you're laying in bed at night, if you have a bed, and you're stressed about bills to pay, or if you can feed your kids or put gas in your car, or if you're going to be able to have a job tomorrow, that is directly linked to your mental health. So if we can have a healthy economy, we have a greater incidence of mental health. And I think Pierre Poilievre has what is needed right now for this country. He's mobilized in significant movement across the country. He's engaging young people. He's engaging people who've never otherwise voted. He's challenging them to think about politics, to get involved in politics, and he's providing solutions on how we fix our economy. And I think he's a forward thinker, and I think he has the experience and values that we need to win this country and to change it for the better.
Awesome. So I wish Mr. Poilievre the best of luck. And of course, Michelle Ferreri, the people of Peterborough-Kawartha, maybe not all of them, but I would say a good number of them appreciate what you do to represent the, the writing. And I appreciate you coming onto the show. I take good care of yourself, and happiest of Easter to you and the family.
You too, Chong, and I would love if you are editing this. I would assume you're going to keep some of it on video. I would love you to make sure you send it, and I'll share it on my social media, because I always love these critical thinking conversations that leave people going, I never looked at it that way or this way. And so I think I always welcome chatting with you. So,
Awesome.
And hopefully I'll get to Vietnam and visit you someday.
Yeah, I look forward to that too.